Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is great to have you here for another ATR Custom Tools webinar. When we were planning this session, I noticed that almost every conference, webinar, and LinkedIn post now seems to talk about artificial intelligence, digital twins, cloud platforms, digital threads, and many other future technologies. And honestly, after a while, it becomes difficult to separate real trends from marketing buzzwords. So today, I do not want to predict exactly what CAD or PLM will look like in 10 years. Instead, I want to focus on a more practical question. What should manufacturing companies prepare for today? If we can answer that question, we are already much closer to the future than most trend reports. Some practical things before we jump into presentation. Feel free to utilize the chat box located in the GoToWebinar panel to share your queries or thoughts. We have set aside some time after the session for any extra questions you might have. So feel free to dive into the presentation without worrying about missing out. And by the way, this webinar should wrap up in about 25 minutes. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and you will be able to watch it later on at your convenience. We will send out the recording to all registered participants after the session. Let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Tero Salonen, and I am the product director at ATR Soft. I have been working with custom tools and engineering software for a long time, starting as a software engineer, later as product manager, and now as product director. Most of my career has been around SolidWorks, PDM, product data, automation, and integrations between engineering and business systems. That background also affects how I look at future trends. I am not especially interested in technology just because it is new. I am interested in what creates practical value for engineering and manufacturing companies. The structure today is intentionally simple. I will use three key points. First, AI becomes a design colleague. Second, the digital thread becomes reality. And third, products become increasingly lifecycle driven. For each point, we will discuss what is changing, why it matters, and how companies should prepare. At the end, we will make it concrete with a practical example of a typical manufacturing company. Before we start with the first trend, I would like to hear your opinion and engage you. So let's check the first poll. So you should see a question, and I would like you to share your opinion, like which engineering activity will AI change first? Design creation, documentation, data management, engineering change management, or simulation and validation. Let's give few seconds you to vote before we share the results. Okay, I think we can end the poll and see the results. So it seems that the data management and the documentation are the ones that got Most of the votes were as engineering change management didn't get any votes. Interesting results. Let us see if your prediction still feels correct after we have discussed the first trend. When people hear AI in engineering, they often imagine AI replacing engineers. Personally, I do not think that is the most interesting question. The more interesting question is, what happens when every engineer gets an extremely capable assistant? An assistant that never gets tired. An assistant that can search thousands or millions of files. An assistant that can find similar designs in seconds. An assistant that can remember things better than any of us. The engineer is still responsible. The engineer still provides judgment, creativity, and accountability. But increasingly, the engineer does not need to start from a blank page. Instead of asking only how to model something, the engineer may ask, show me similar designs. What are the risks? What has worked before and what will this change impact? That is why I use the phrase design colleague, not because AI becomes the engineer, but because it becomes a constant support in the engineering workflow. This is probably one of the most important preparation slides in the whole webinar. Many companies are currently discussing AI projects, and that is good. But the discussion often starts with, which AI tool should we get? I would start with another question. Would AI be able to understand our engineering data today? If the answer is no, then that is where preparation should start. Not because metadata is exciting. Let us be honest, metadata is really rarely exciting, but AI becomes much more useful when it can trust the data it works with. If file names, custom properties, revision practices, or rules are inconsistent, AI can still help, but it will also expose those weaknesses very quickly. So preparation for AI is really preparation of company knowledge. If you have worked around CAD, PDM, ERP, or PLM for a while, you have probably heard the word integration thousands of times. I certainly have. Integrations are still important, but I think the conversation is evolving. Historically, we connected systems, CAD to ERP, PDM to PLM, PLM to manufacturing. Now we are increasingly trying to connect information across the full life cycle. A customer requirement becomes a design. The design becomes manufacturing data. Manufacturing creates a delivered product. The delivered product generates service information, and that information eventually influences the next product generation. That continuous life cycle flow is what people often mean by digital thread. The idea itself is not new. What is changing is that companies are beginning to see it as a business requirement, not just an IT integration project. And with that, we can check our next poll to engage you a bit. So what do you think? Where is the largest product data gap today, in your opinion? Is it engineering to manufacturing, engineering to ERP, ERP to engineering, service to engineering, or are you not sure? So again, we will give you a few moments to expose your opinion before we share the results. Okay, it seems that pretty much everyone have voted, so we can see the results. And this time it was more equally shared. So it looks like that the both engineering to manufacturing and not sure got actually engineering to ERP was 1/3 that thought it's the biggest gap, whereas the engineering to manufacturing second biggest and ERP to engineering third. But now all got some votes, so it's not really obvious, I can see. One can conclude maybe that information exists, but it does not always travel where it is needed. Okay. Companies often begin by looking at technology. I would start somewhere else, however. I would start by asking, who owns product information? Who creates it? Who changes it? And who consumes it? Where do we duplicate the same information? Where do we still have manual handovers? These questions are sometimes more difficult than the technical integration itself. Future-ready companies think less about individual software systems and more about the life cycle of information. This is also why data ownership and process ownership become so important. Without ownership, the digital thread easily becomes just another technical diagram. This trend is perhaps the most underestimated one. When people hear CAD or PLM, they still think about designing a product and releasing it, and finished. But increasingly, products do not really have a finish line. They may include software, connectivity, sensors, service information, usage data, and digital documentation. They may continue generating value and information long after delivery. That means engineering decisions continue to matter throughout the life cycle. In practice, product development becomes less about just creating a model and more about managing a product as it evolves over time. That is a very different mindset from the traditional drawing and release process. One of the biggest changes engineers may experience during the next decade is that product performance becomes more visible. Companies increasingly want answers such as which configurations work best, which options customers actually use, which components create service issues, which changes improve reliability. The organizations that learn fastest from real-world product usage will often innovate fastest, but that requires collaboration between engineering, manufacturing, service, and business teams. Future success becomes a life cycle challenge rather than only an engineering challenge. Now, Let us step away from theory. Whenever I participate in webinars, I usually remember practical examples better than just a theory. So let us imagine a company. We will call it Nurnik Machines. They are a successful mid-sized manufacturing company. They design and manufacture customized industrial equipment. They use SolidWorks, they have PDM, they have ERP, and they definitely have Excel. And if they are anything like most manufacturing companies, they probably have a few important spreadsheets that nobody fully understands, but everybody is afraid to delete. My point is, there is nothing unusual about this company. Projects are delivered, customers are generally happy, engineers are busy. At first glance, everything seems to work. And that is exactly why this example is interesting. Then market expectations start changing. Customers want more customization. Lead times become shorter. Service expectations increase. Management starts hearing about AI, and competitors begin investing in automation. So Nordic Machines begins investigating future technologies, and suddenly they discover something important. The biggest obstacle is not lack of technology. The obstacle is inconsistent information. Duplicate data, different naming conventions, product information existing in 5 places or sometimes in 0 places. And perhaps most importantly, engineering knowledge exists only inside certain people's heads. To be honest, I have seen this many times over the years. The company thinks it has a technology problem, but actually it has a knowledge problem. The company decides not to start with a huge AI project. Instead, they begin preparing. First, they improve product information quality. Then, they improve the information flow between systems. Then they capture engineering knowledge. Only after that do they introduce AI-assisted processes in areas where data and rules are good enough. Finally, they start collecting feedback from manufacturing and service and feeding it back into engineering. What I like about this example is that none of these steps are especially revolutionary, but together they create a foundation that makes future technologies much more valuable. Future technologies tend to amplify strengths and weaknesses. If your foundation is strong, AI creates more value. But if your foundation is weak, AI exposes the weaknesses faster. And this is good point to have our last poll. So what do you think? What should be your company's highest priority during the next 2 years? Is it improving engineering data quality, increase automation, to have better integrations, maybe adopt AI solutions, or improve PLM processes? You might think that all of these are really important, but what you would consider as the highest priority? And it seems that pretty much everyone has voted, so we can see the results. So clear number one is improve engineering data quality, whereas the automation didn't get any votes. Actually, there is no wrong answer in here, but I hope that today's message is clear. These priorities are all connected. The organizations that build strong foundations today will have the most options tomorrow. Let us finish where we started. The webinar title was Future Trends in CAD and PLM. What should companies prepare for? So my answer is surprisingly simple. Prepare your information, prepare your knowledge, prepare your processes. The technology will continue evolving regardless. AI will improve, PLM systems will improve, cloud platforms will improve, digital twins will become more practical. But the companies that benefit most will be the companies that understand their products, trust their data, and continuously learn from both. So, if I had to summarize today's webinar into a single sentence, it would be this. The future belongs to companies that can turn engineering knowledge into reusable business value. Thank you for joining today's session. I would be happy to take any questions. So please feel free to type your questions in the GoToWebinar question panel. I will do my best to answer them now, and if something needs more detailed follow-up, we can also continue the discussion after the webinar. So we can wait for a few moments if there are any questions. At the moment, it looks like that we don't have any. We can just give a few moments before we wrap up the session. Well, it's also okay not to have any questions. As we wrap up, I'd like to remind you that the recording of this session will be available for you to review at your convenience. We are also excited to announce our next webinar, which will be held on September 10, and the topic will be what to define before an ERP integration project. Keep an eye on your email for further details and registration information. Thank you again for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. If you would like to continue the discussion, please contact us at info@customtools.info. Have a great day.